Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into a very particular kind of nonsense. A gilded nonsense. The kind where powdered wigs wobble dramatically, dinner guests clap at fruit, and someone's full-time job involves polishing a pineapple. You're seated at a long mahogany table under the flicker of candlelight. You're wearing 3 uncomfortable layers of brocade. Your shoes are far too narrow, and your powdered wig itches in a way you're not allowed to acknowledge publicly. The smell of roasted meats and lavender water fills the room, mingling with something unexpected. A sweet, tangy perfume cutting through the mutton, a perfume that smells tropical. Then you see it, nestled atop a silver pedestal, crowned with a doily and positioned dead center like a royal guest, sits the pineapple. Not sliced, not diced, not touched. It just sits there. And everyone stares. This is not a joke. This is Georgian England, and that pineapple? That is the most important thing at the table. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, comment below with your location and local time. I love seeing where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lean in for a better look. The pineapple is golden, well, yellowish golden, but in this flickering light, it might as well be made of fire. Spiky, symmetrical, and slightly smug. It doesn't look quite real. You half expect it to blink. The host clears his throat, gestures to the fruit, and the guests murmur appreciatively. Ah yes, someone says, swirling a tiny glass of Madeira. It's quite robust. Another nod seriously. Matured beautifully, one can tell. You'd think they were discussing wine, but no, it's a pineapple. And no one touches it, not yet. Not for hours. See, in this world, pineapples aren't fruit. They're status, they're theater, they're botanical aristocracy. And for this one evening, they sit enthroned above pheasants, tarts, trifles, and even the prized lamprey pie. In Georgian England, pineapples are the ultimate flex. Imported from tropical colonies and too delicate for rough seas or cold cellars, they're rare, expensive, and spectacularly impractical, which of course makes them perfect for showing off. It's said that at the height of pineapple fever in the 18th century, a single fruit could cost the equivalent of thousands of today's dollars, enough to fund a small army of footmen. Or, alternatively, just one very smug dinner party. Historians still argue whether the pineapple craze was a genuine love of flavor or pure social competition. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. What we do know is that by the time you reach this banquet in your imaginary breeches, the pineapple is a known celebrity. There are even rumors, whispered between bites of pickled quail, that some guests rent pineapples just to put them on display, a sort of fruity fraudulence, like carrying a designer handbag you don't own. But edible. Technically. You glance again at the fruit. It's starting to look like it's judging you. The footman returns with a fresh napkin and fluffs it around the pineapple's base. Reverently, like he's dressing a baby king. And then, as the courses arrive, turtle soup, roast duck with orange water, syllabub that threatens to collapse under its own fluff, your host begins a slow, dramatic speech. Tonight, he says, we are joined by the most noble fruit of them all. There's a beat of silence. Then a light smattering of claps for the pineapple. You think this must be a joke? But no, it's serious, dead serious. One woman leans in and whispers, "Did you know they grow upside down? Isn't that simply scandalous?" You nod. It is scandalous. Probably. Another guest recounts the tale of the first pineapple to reach England in the 1600s. Charles II had his portrait done with it, don't you know? Like a trophy. You picture it. Royalty cradling a pineapple like a knight holding a slain dragon. It's absurd. It's perfect. By now, the pineapple has become less of a fruit and more of a shared hallucination. People talk about it, speculate about its journey. One man claims his cousin once touched a pineapple and fainted. "Couldn't handle the aroma," he says solemnly. Eventually, after several hours of admiration, a hush falls over the table. The host lifts a knife. It glints in the candlelight, and with theatrical slowness, he slices into the pineapple. The room gasps, quietly, tastefully. The fruit yields with a soft, juicy sound. A few slices are laid on fine porcelain plates and passed around like relics. You're handed a sliver. You taste it. And honestly, it's good, sweet, sharp. But it's just pineapple, juicy, tangy, slightly fibrous. But no one around you says that. They eat in near silence, eyebrows raised in awe, as if the flavor contains secrets. Someone sighs. It tastes like the future. You don't argue. You're too busy chewing. And thus ends the first act in the long, weird, lavish story of the Georgian pineapple obsession. A tale of greenhouses, rental scams, social theater, and fruit so precious it was too good to eat. But don't worry. We're just getting started. The next morning, you're not surprised to find yourself standing in a walled garden behind a grand country house, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, breath misting as you exhale into the crisp Georgian air. The sun's barely up, and already the gardeners are bustling, snipping, brushing, wheeling strange little contraptions toward a brick structure that seems oddly ornate for a shed. It's not a shed, of course. It's a pineapple stove, a hothouse built specifically to grow a single fruit that doesn't even want to be here. Inside, the air is steamy and thick with the scent of damp soil, compost, and faint sweetness. Rows of pineapple plants squat in large terracotta pots, their waxy green fronds spiky and impertinent. They look out of place, like tourists who brought the wrong shoes. The heat comes from a network of flues and underground furnaces, all carefully managed to maintain a tropical illusion. You crouch to feel the warmth along the brick floor and imagine how many hours went into building this botanical theater. The gardener, his coat dusted with soot and pride, tells you that each stove takes about 2 years of careful tending to coax a single pineapple to fruit. 2 years of constant heat, airflow management, manure beds, and hope. You try not to laugh. But then again, someone once raised a peacock just to match their wallpaper, so really, why not a pineapple sauna? These hothouses, sometimes called pineries, weren't just functional. They were status symbols in themselves. Landowners designed them with elegant facades, arched windows, and decorative plaques. You could grow oranges, grapes, even coffee beans, but nothing inspired the same awe as a pineapple ripening in January. Historians still argue whether these pineries were truly efficient or just expensive party tricks. Some claim only a handful of estates ever produced pineapples regularly. Others insist there was a small but passionate pineapple-growing elite who knew their flues like the back of their soot-stained hands. You walk past rows of potted pineapple plants, many of which are still young and fruitless. A few have tiny bumps forming near their centers, early signs of fruit. The gardener leans in and murmurs, "They're bashful. You can't rush them." You're not sure if he's serious. Honestly, neither is he. The heating system, you're told, requires constant vigilance. Firewood must be fed through narrow passageways that run beneath the brick beds. At night, someone sleeps nearby, rousing every few hours to tend the fire. You picture some poor soul wrapped in blankets, poking at embers while whispering words of encouragement to half-ripe pineapples. In larger estates, the pineapple stove was only one part of a vast operation. There were kitchen gardens, herb walls, melon pits, and even cucumber houses. But the pineapple remained the jewel of it all, a symbol of global reach, horticultural mastery, and just a touch of absurdity. You reach the far end of the stove and spot a fruit nearly ready. It's still smaller than you'd expect, and a little paler. but the gardener beams at it like a proud parent. "That one's for Lady Hester's supper," he says with a knowing nod. "They're hiring a quartet just for the reveal." You stare at the pineapple. It stares back, and you realize that in this moment, somewhere between soot, sweat, and sulfurous steam, this strange fruit has become a performance. It isn't just about growing it. It's about controlling it, forcing it to thrive in hostile weather, making it bloom on your terms. It's a botanical version of a well-mannered spaniel, exotic, difficult, and very good at sitting still for guests. In your imagination, you're already seeing a dinner table decked in starched linen, a pair of powdered lords debating horticulture while the pineapple glows softly in the candlelight. But here in the stove, it's just a plant, growing slowly, doing its best. Before you leave, the gardener offers you a cup of nettle tea and a piece of stale gingerbread. "We don't eat the pineapples ourselves," he says with a shrug. "They're too important." You sip the tea. It tastes like damp socks and virtue. And as the door closes behind you and the warm air gives way to a chill breeze, you start to understand just how far people will go for prestige. Even if it means building a furnace for fruit, you step out of the pineapple stove and back into the English morning, blinking at the sudden grayness. It's almost like the garden is sighing with relief, free from all that tropical performance art. The manor looms in the distance, its windows gleaming, its chimneys already puffing politely into the clouds. But your feet don't lead you back inside just yet. No, you follow the crunch of gravel and the faint sound of carriage wheels to a smaller building near the side of the estate. A curious structure made of brick and glass, low to the ground, with arched windows and, strangely, no chimney. This is not a greenhouse, at least not by name. This, you're told, is a fruitery, a word that sounds made up but somehow isn't. A kind of showroom for elite produce. Inside, things are suspiciously well lit and clean. Rows of pineapples, real and otherwise, stand on narrow shelves beside carved melons, polished quinces, and baskets of hothouse strawberries that cost more than most people's yearly wage. You pause by a pedestal that holds what looks like a pineapple. But upon closer inspection, well, the thing is, wax. The wax pineapple is disturbingly lifelike. The color is perfect, the prickly texture spot on, and the little tuft of leaves curls just so. You resist the urge to poke it. "Ah, yes," says a passing footman, clearly delighted to have someone to lecture. "That one's for display only, from last year's harvest. Still holds its shape, you see." You blink. It's last year's pineapple, waxed, preserved, displayed like a retired general. Apparently, Georgian England was not content merely to grow pineapples in the wrong climate. They needed backup pineapples, eternal pineapples. And when all else failed, they made fake pineapples, some from wax, others from painted wood or papier-mâché, just to sit them in the center of a table and bask in the illusion of abundance. Historians still argue whether these replicas were meant to fool anyone or simply to fill an expected space at the feast. Either way, they were common enough that some households rotated their faux fruit depending on guest familiarity. "Oh, the Hastings are coming? Put out the real one then." You lean in and sniff the wax model. It smells faintly of beeswax and varnish. A woman behind you clears her throat. Whether out of offense or solidarity, you're not sure. Along the walls of the fruitery, sketches of different pineapple types are displayed like fashion plates. Smooth cayenne, red Spanish, Queen Victoria. Some look plump and friendly, others spiny and alarmingly militant. Apparently, even pineapples have social hierarchies. At one end of the room, you find a kind of fruit throne, an ornate chair carved from walnut, with a wide, shallow bowl in the seat. It's shaped, unmistakably, to hold one very noble pineapple. A butler informs you this chair is wheeled in before major dinners, so the fruit can make an entrance. An entrance! You imagine it now. A footman rolling this tiny throne down a marble hallway, guests rising to their feet, a quartet playing something dramatic as the pineapple glides toward its pedestal. It's the sort of scene that should feel ridiculous. And yet here, it feels expected. Pineapples were, quite literally, celebrities. Households would sometimes display one for weeks before slicing it, allowing visitors to admire it like a painting. You weren't just eating fruit, you were hosting it. Of course, this obsession wasn't purely domestic. Clubs, libraries, even auction houses got in on the craze. There were pineapple tastings, pineapple poetry contests, and at least one documented case of a man composing a sonnet to a particularly symmetrical specimen. That's not a joke, that's history. Glorious, sugar-scented, slightly unhinged history. You stroll past another shelf of wax fruits, apples, pears, a suspiciously smooth-looking fig, and return to the central pedestal. This one holds a fresh pineapple, imported just days ago from the West Indies. The smell is rich, overwhelming, heady. You're told this one will never be eaten. It's already been booked by 3 households, each of whom will borrow it for a weekend dinner, then pass it along, like a very perishable celebrity. This is the pineapple rental economy, and yes, it was real. In 18th century London, pineapples could be rented. By the night, by the event, by the illusion. A fruit broker would lend out a prime pineapple to a dinner party, wedding, or seasonal ball, where it would be displayed prominently but not consumed. The next day, the fruit would be retrieved, polished if necessary, and sent on to the next grateful host. As long as no one cut into it, the pineapple could perform at several engagements before finally retiring, either into someone's dessert or into a wax museum of fruity fame. You shake your head, stunned by the delicacy of the whole scheme. There are whispers, of course, about what happens when a guest eats a rented pineapple. It's social doom, like stealing the centerpiece or licking the crown jewels. So you keep your hands to yourself. You walk out of the fruitery and back into the garden, the scent of warm brick and sweet fruit lingering behind you. Somewhere, faintly, you hear the pop of a champagne cork and the sound of someone toasting to the most charming pineapple in all of Gloucestershire. And honestly, you believe them. You wander back toward the main house, passing a stone urn filled not with flowers but with carved pineapples, moss clinging to their stone crowns like powdered wigs left out in the rain. Apparently, even the garden statuary hasn't escaped the obsession. As you near the doors, a footman in impeccable livery steps aside, glances briefly at your muddy shoes, then politely pretends not to notice. A true professional. Inside, the drawing room buzzes with idle chatter. The guests are dressed like freshly upholstered furniture, all silk and velvet and buttons that serve no practical purpose. The tea smells faintly of bergamot and ambition. You're handed a cup, then gently herded toward a large table in the center of the room. Atop it sits, you guessed it, a pineapple. This one is unusually small, perfectly symmetrical, balanced on a mirrored tray surrounded by paper doilies and overly decorative forks. No one is eating it. Instead, people are admiring it from all sides like art connoisseurs in a gallery. One guest adjusts his spectacles, leans in, and murmurs something about the delicacy of the node spacing. You nod wisely. You have no idea what he means. Eventually, someone, an older woman with rings on every finger and the voice of someone used to being obeyed, gestures for the butler to bring the stand. Everyone straightens, forks poised, but no one moves towards the fruit. Instead, the butler picks up the pineapple and gently, reverently, places it atop the serving stand. Then, with a flourish you suspect he practiced in a mirror, he steps back and folds his hands. Everyone claps for the placement of the pineapple. You take a sip of tea and try to keep your face still. This part of the evening, it turns out, is all about etiquette. Specifically, pineapple etiquette, an elaborate, unwritten code about how to behave in the presence of this sacred fruit. Historians still argue whether these rules were widely known or invented by overly zealous hosts with too much time and not enough sense. But in high society, it was understood that pineapples demanded respect. No reaching, no slicing without invitation, no casual glances. If offered a piece, you were to accept it with reverence, eat it slowly, and ideally compliment the texture using poetic but vague terms. Sun-warmed, honeyed, and delightfully fibrous were considered acceptable. It was also customary to make a small remark about the journey the fruit had likely taken, a nod to its colonial origins, its maritime suffering, its horticultural bravery. Some guests went so far as to raise a toast to the planter, the packer, and the pineapple itself. One guest at the party tonight, a gentleman with the air of someone who reads shipping manifests for fun, launches into a story about a pineapple that arrived so ripe it disintegrated before the first course. A tragedy, he says, shaking his head. I wept. Others murmur in solemn agreement. Someone sighs. A small girl, perhaps a relative or a future duchess in training, asks if pineapples grow on trees. The room freezes. Her mother clears her throat and quietly corrects her. No, darling. Pineapples grow from the ground, like cabbages. Very glamorous cabbages. The girl nods, suitably ashamed, and is handed a biscuit to distract her from her botanical disgrace. As you nibble a bit of shortbread, you overhear a footman explaining to a confused foreign visitor that pineapples are never peeled in front of guests. It's too intimate, he says with a straight face. You don't know whether to laugh or bow. Elsewhere in the room, a footman carefully polishes the pineapple's spiky crown with a cloth. He does it gently, like he's styling the hair of a nervous bride. The room pretends not to notice, but you can tell they're all watching. Pineapple presentation was so important that entire manuals were written about fruit display. Tables were arranged with mathematical precision, with the pineapple at the exact center, flanked by ranks of grapes, oranges, and sometimes carved sugar sculptures shaped like mythical beasts. The effect was less snack and more still life that could come to life and judge you. Some families even hired outside decorators, early event planners really, who specialized in fruit arranging. Their job? Make the pineapple look like the apex of civilization, which, in the Georgian imagination, it arguably was. One guest mentions a display he saw in Bath. 2 pineapples stacked, balanced by a silver dolphin, surrounded by candied violets and flanked by crystal bowls of spiced almonds. Quite gauche, he mutters, but ambitious. You can't help but wonder how many pineapples cracked under the pressure, literally. As the evening winds down, dessert is served. Lemon syllabub, rosewater jellies, a tart so delicate it seems to tremble on the spoon. The pineapple is finally sliced by the host, who passes small, translucent wedges on chilled porcelain plates. Each guest eats in silence. One woman closes her eyes and murmurs something about sunlight made solid. Another man nods, tears up slightly, and mutters, remarkably golden. You take a bite. It tastes good, like pineapple. You smile politely, then return your attention to your teacup, which doesn't require poetry. The room exhales. The ritual is complete. And you, dear guest, have survived your first proper pineapple encounter, with dignity, mostly. You awaken the next morning with a slightly sore jaw, either from the pineapple's fibrous vengeance or from all the restrained, polite clapping. You stretch, shuffle toward the window, and peer out at the mist-shrouded landscape of Georgian splendor. Somewhere in the distance, a gardener sneezes, and just like that, the day begins again with the soft clatter of teacups and the lingering scent of citrus polish. Today's adventure takes you not into the drawing room or garden, but to the butler's pantry. A world of precision, silver polish, and trained eyebrow arches. You slip through a narrow door, duck past a shelf of folded napkins, and find yourself in a long, low room glowing with candlelight and quiet dread. The butler stands at the center, one hand resting gently on the lid of a large wooden box. Inside the box, nestled in velvet and straw, sits another pineapple. This one isn't here for guests, not yet. It's in training. You see, in Georgian England, preparing a pineapple for public display was an operation. Not just the fruit itself, but the entire ceremony surrounding it. The carrying, the placing, the unveiling. And who was at the center of this ritual? The butler, or, in some grander households, a pineapple valet. Yes, that was sometimes a thing. A gentleman assigned the singular task of maintaining, handling, and showcasing the family's prized pineapples. Historians still argue whether this role was ever official or more of an inside joke among upper servants. But what is agreed upon is that the pineapple's debut required choreography. This morning's butler, his waistcoat starched to the rigidity of fine origami, gently lifts the fruit and begins a rehearsal. Yes, a rehearsal. He walks across the tiled floor, balancing the pineapple on a small silver salver. His posture is perfect, his pace glacial, his face unreadable. You follow behind, nearly tripping over a rug. He stops before a mirror, checks his angle, adjusts the fruit's alignment by a centimeter, and nods to himself. No glare off the leaves this time, he murmurs. Better. There's a second tray, a backup tray, lined in burgundy velvet in case the fruit's color doesn't pop properly against the standard white. Matching the pineapple to the tablescape is apparently a science. On a nearby table, you spot a pineapple polishing cloth, embroidered with a tiny crown. Beside it, a notebook detailing previous pineapple showings. Dates, guests, comments like, "Lady Worthington very nearly touched it. Avoid next time." This is serious business. The butler glances at you and says, "We once had a gentleman guest mistake the pineapple stand for a spittoon." You blink, he doesn't. There was fallout. He turns away and resumes his pacing, the pineapple now held slightly aloft, as if he's presenting Simba to the savannah. Elsewhere in the pantry, a junior footman is learning how to slice pineapple with a special curved blade. Not for consumption, yet, but for display slicing, a careful art that reveals the flesh without disturbing the crown. You overhear them discussing rind patterns. Apparently, how the pineapple is cut says a great deal about your taste. Spirals? Bold? Cubes? Provincial. Rings? Only in desperate situations. Someone brings in a tiny dome of glass, a cloche, that will be used to preserve the fruit's freshness during its pre-showcase nap. It's like a fruit spa day. You step back and marvel at the lengths people go to make a tropical fruit appear as though it belongs on a sideboard in Hampshire. And not just belong. Shine. But here's the kicker. All this work is often for a fruit that won't be eaten, not for days, sometimes not ever. The pineapple is a guest, not a course, an ornament, a conversation starter, a resume. Guests might compliment it, write about it in letters, brag about it in Bath, but most will never taste it. Instead, the fruit is whisked back after the dinner, gently rewrapped, and returned to cold storage, or sent on to the next renter, or preserved in wax, or, in rare cases, stuffed. Yes, really, with fabric and sawdust, and turned into a keepsake. You eye the butler, now bowing ever so slightly to an imaginary lady before presenting the tray. He doesn't smile, but you suspect he takes pride in his pineapple prowess. He tells you about a rival estate down the road where the footman once dropped the fruit. "It bounced," he says gravely. You gasp. "They had to borrow one from a grocer in London, at great expense." He won't say the grocer's name, too scandalous. There's a brief moment of silence as the butler re-centers the pineapple on the tray. Then he sighs, softly, and says, "People think pineapples are about indulgence, but they're not. They're about discipline." You nod, as though this makes perfect sense. And, oddly, it kind of does. In a world of powdered wigs and handwritten invitations, where dinner parties were battlegrounds of wit and waistcoats, the pineapple stood as the ultimate symbol of control. You didn't just buy one, you trained for it. As the butler begins yet another slow procession across the tiled floor, you quietly back out of the room. And just before the door closes, you hear him say, to no one in particular, "Now, again," but with more reverence. By now your boots are polished, your cravat is slightly less crooked, and you've seen more pineapples than most fruit sellers in a lifetime. But you're not done yet. Not by a long shot. Because tonight you're attending a Georgian supper club, and word on the cobbled street is that a very special pineapple will be making its appearance. You arrive at a townhouse in the heart of London, lit with lanterns that flicker in the fog like sleepy fireflies. The footman at the door offers you a candle and a sideways glance, then ushers you through a corridor lined with portraits of people who look slightly too proud of their fruit. The dining room is small but glittering. Wall sconces throw warm gold across polished mirrors, creating the illusion of a room twice its size and 3 times as important. The table is already set with cream-colored china, delicate silver forks, and napkins folded into improbable shapes, one of which might be a dolphin or a very ambitious hat. At the center of it all, under a bell jar of etched glass, rests the pineapple. And not just any pineapple. No, this one is rumored to have been shipped directly from the West Indies on a private sloop. Its arrival has been the talk of the square. It's said to have survived a storm, a theft attempt, and, allegedly, a duel. The guests begin to arrive, each one taking a moment to admire the pineapple, as if greeting a mutual friend who just happens to be mute and covered in spikes. A man in a waistcoat the color of pistachios leans in and murmurs, "It's smaller than I imagined." A woman replies, "Well, so is the Duke of Gloucester, but no one brings that up at supper." You try not to snort. A servant begins pouring wine. Not just any wine, Madeira, sweet and oxidized, beloved by Georgians for its warmth and its ability to make pineapple poetry sound like actual literature. A gentleman raises his glass and says, "To the fruit that made Britain blush." You clink, sip, and begin to ease into the evening. The host stands. "Before supper begins," he says with a practiced smile, "a few words in honor of our guest of honor." He gestures dramatically to the pineapple, which glistens under the candlelight like it knows exactly what's going on. He then reads a short poem. 6 lines, rhyming couplets, most of which involve the word divine. When he finishes, there's a polite round of applause. The pineapple does not bow. It's finally time to begin the meal, but not before the bell jar is lifted. The butler does this slowly, carefully, with the kind of focus usually reserved for surgery or removing a souffle from an oven. As the jar is lifted, a wave of scent drifts outward. Sweet, earthy, humid. The room collectively inhales. The host whispers, "Ladies and gentlemen, inhale history." You consider it a bit much, but also fair enough. As the first course arrives, clear turtle soup, steaming and strangely translucent, the pineapple remains untouched. It won't be sliced until dessert. Until then, it watches. It judges. And of course, it's not just there for drama. Pineapples, in this context, are subtle tools of social maneuvering. To be invited to a dinner with a pineapple is to be considered someone. And to serve a pineapple? That's a declaration. A declaration of wealth, taste, and, perhaps most critically, connections to the global empire. Because behind every Georgian pineapple is an invisible chain of labor. Enslaved workers on Caribbean plantations, sailors dodging storms, porters unpacking crates at Bristol docks, and wealthy patrons selecting only the best to flaunt beside their syllabub. Historians still argue whether this level of performance dining was common or confined to the upper echelons of the gentry. But what's certain is this: pineapples were never just about flavor. They were about narrative. And right now, you're inside that narrative. Sitting 5 chairs down from a viscount who keeps mispronouncing ananas, and across from a widow who claims to have grown her own pineapple in a teacup, with nothing but steam and good intentions. You smile politely. You have no idea if she's serious. You suspect she doesn't either. The second course arrives, braised venison with orange peel and cinnamon. Your seat neighbor leans in and says, "Exotic pairings are very fashionable. One must keep the palate alert, you know." You nod solemnly and choose something that tastes vaguely like Christmas. Throughout the meal, the pineapple remains the centerpiece, not only of the table, but of conversation. One man insists pineapples improve digestion. Another claims they've been used to predict the weather. Someone else swears pineapples prevent melancholy, though he admits that might only apply to cats. No one bothers to fact-check him. Finally, as the last meat is cleared and the candles are trimmed, the host stands once again. "My friends," he says, "we now make the descent into pleasure," which is Georgian for dessert time. The butler returns, this time with a gleaming knife. It's not serrated, it's not curved. It's absurdly beautiful and probably been polished since breakfast. With all the reverence of a coronation, the pineapple is sliced. The sound, soft, fibrous, wet, is oddly loud in the silence. Each guest receives a sliver, laid atop fine porcelain and accompanied by crystallized ginger and a drizzle of rose syrup. You take a bite. It's sweet, cool, slightly fizzy. Maybe your mind is playing tricks on you, but you could swear it tastes like velvet feels. Someone to your left sighs and says, "It tastes like the end of August." You don't even question it anymore. The pineapple has done its job. The meal is complete. The social dance of fruit admiration has come and gone. And as you set down your fork and sip the last of your wine, you realize something truly astonishing. You want another piece, but of course, there is none. The next morning begins, as many do in this polite but quietly unhinged century, with a brisk walk and a scandalous rumor. You're strolling past a row of Georgian townhouses, admiring the fan lights and wrought iron railings, when you overhear a conversation between 2 powdered ladies huddled beneath parasols. "One simply doesn't serve a pineapple at breakfast," one of them hisses. "She boiled it, with eggs." Gasps, fanning, and a deeply offended spaniel. You pick up your pace, not because you disapprove, but because this is clearly your kind of chaos. You follow the whispers all the way to Covent Garden, where fruit sellers are beginning to unload their morning haul. Most of it is local fare. Apples, pears, berries in woven baskets. But tucked beneath a canopy of canvas, sitting proudly atop a crate filled with sawdust, is a single, radiant pineapple. It's already drawing a crowd. This one's not destined for a supper table or a private ball. No, this pineapple is about to become theatrical. You follow it, yes, follow the pineapple, as it's gently lifted, crated, and carried not to a market stall, but to a nearby playhouse. Because tonight, the pineapple will make its stage debut. It sounds ridiculous until you realize how popular pineapple-themed entertainment became. Not just as props, but as plot devices, fashion statements, and even punchlines. Georgian theater loved a symbol, and the pineapple had become just that. A golden shorthand for wealth, aspiration, and sometimes comedy. Historians still argue whether this was satire or sincerity, whether audiences laughed with or at the pineapple. Some suggest it was an exaggerated nod to empire, others that it was simply irresistible set dressing. Either way, pineapples started showing up in comedies of manners, bawdy sketches, and dinner party farces. In one particularly popular play, a pineapple goes missing during a ball and turns up in a duchess's hat. Audiences howled. The duchess allegedly did not. As you step into the empty theater, the prop master is carefully arranging the fruit on a silver tray near the footlights. "Third act reveal," he explains. "Big moment. It's thrown at a suitor." You nod, gravely. Of course it is. Backstage, there's an entire table of pineapple-related props. A painted fan featuring pineapples in various moods. A bonnet with velvet fruit sewn into the brim. Even a collapsible paper pineapple that springs open with the flick of a wrist. Equal parts impressive and terrifying. Actors rehearse lines that refer to the fruit in the most poetic ways imaginable. "Oh, you tropical crown of desire," one of them shouts, arms flung wide. The director pauses. "Less desperation, Reginald, more yearning. Remember, she's comparing him to a pineapple, not begging for jam. You take a seat in the shadows and let the rehearsal wash over you. There's something almost hypnotic about it. The way this absurd fruit continues to hold court, even here, among the powdered wigs and grease paint. In the script, the pineapple is stolen, passed from suitor to suitor, and ultimately ends up in the hands of the heroine, who bites into it and declares, "He who gives the fruit of kings shall have my hand." It's not Shakespeare, but it is oddly satisfying. As the rehearsal breaks for tea, the cast gathers around the real pineapple, taking turns sniffing it and offering commentary. One says it smells like Jamaica. Another swears it smells like heartbreak. You're not entirely sure what heartbreak smells like, but you admire the conviction. The prop master tells you this pineapple cost nearly 3 guineas, the same as a decent suit or half a year's rent for a servant. But it was worth it, he insists. Audiences gasp when they see the real thing. It's the smell, he says. Paint can fake the look, but only the real ones smell right. You step up and give it a cautious sniff. He's not wrong. There's something wild and humid beneath the sugar, like an orchard trapped in a storm. You learn that some theaters began renting pineapples for major productions, much like wealthy families did for dinner parties. Occasionally, a fruit would tour with a production, traveling from London to Bath to Edinburgh, living out its days as a minor celebrity. There were even rumors of stagehands tucking into underripe slices behind the curtain. Pineapple theft being, you gather, an eternal temptation. You watch as the director tests the lighting, adjusting the angle so the pineapple casts just the right shadow across the heroine's cheek. She falls in love, he says, but the pineapple has to help sell it. You suppose there are worse wingmen. Later, in the theater's cramped green room, you discover an entire drawer of pineapple-themed brooches, hairpins, and shoe buckles. A wardrobe assistant tells you that pineapple imagery is all the rage among the audience, too. Fans wave golden fruit. Lapels sparkle with tiny enameled slices. It's aspirational, she says with a wink. Even if they've never seen one, they know what it means. That evening, the curtain rises to a packed house. You sit mid-balcony, just close enough to hear the gasps when the pineapple makes its entrance. And yes, it gets applause. The audience leans forward, enchanted. Not by the plot, not by the heroine, but by the quiet shimmer of that fruit beneath the lights. And you realize, as the applause swells again, that this fruit, this absurd, spiky orb, is no longer just a delicacy. It's theater. The play may be over, but the pineapple's career is far from finished. You step out of the theater into the cool London night, your head still echoing with lines like, "He offered me sugar, but I wanted golden fruit." Around you, the audience buzzes. Not about the actors, mind you, but about the pineapple. One woman insists it was a bit too ripe. Another claims she caught its scent from the balcony. Someone asks if it was really imported, or just a clever bit of carving. It's clear, the pineapple is no longer just fruit, it's celebrity. The next morning, you find yourself back in the drawing room of a fashionable townhouse. Not because you planned to, but because you've been invited to something called a fruit viewing. Which, as it turns out, is precisely what it sounds like. The hostess greets you with exaggerated warmth and a whiff of lavender water. "You're just in time," she says. "We've had it unboxed specially for the occasion." And there it is. A pineapple nestled on silk cushions, resting atop a low marble plinth in the center of the room. Guests circulate around it slowly, murmuring admiration the way one might at a gallery or a particularly talented child. One man strokes his chin and says, "The crown is assertive." A woman beside him adds, "Like a helmet, but charming." You resist the urge to giggle. The butler stands nearby with a long feathered duster, not for cleaning the pineapple, but for gently brushing away any specks of dust that dare approach its golden surface. It's both ridiculous and strangely moving. These viewings were surprisingly common among the upper classes in Georgian England. When someone acquired a pineapple, especially if it was a rental or freshly grown, they might hold a viewing party where guests were invited not to eat, but to appreciate. There would be light music, tea, and perhaps a card table or two. But the main attraction was always the fruit, seated alone in its place of honor, like a bride or a prize-winning heifer. Some hostesses even positioned a second pineapple elsewhere in the room, a decoy to keep curious fingers away from the real treasure. Woe betide the guest who bit into the fake. You lean in for a closer look and overhear two ladies discussing a scandal. Apparently, someone at last week's viewing in Mayfair had touched the pineapple without gloves. "Bare fingers," one whispers, horrified. "Common fingers." Your host offers you a pamphlet printed on thick cream paper. It's a short poem written for the occasion. The pineapple has inspired verse. Again, you read aloud, softly. "Thou art not fruit, but throne and flame, a kingdom's pride, a fragrant name." It's dreadful. But in a way, that makes it perfect. Historians still argue whether these poems were genuine odes or just fashionable nonsense. But the pineapple was a muse. And poets, well, they'll write about anything for coin and a slice of cake. You sip tea and stare at the fruit, which now seems faintly smug, as if it knows it's been immortalized in rhyme, admired more than most dukes, and stroked with a feather duster more delicately than a Fabergé egg. Then comes the real twist. The hostess stands and announces, "Now, for something truly special." The room leans forward. Someone drops a sugar cube in excitement. She gestures, and the butler disappears. Moments later, he returns with another pineapple, but this one is not for display. It's for tasting. You can feel the mood shift. There's tension in the air. Half the room tries to remain composed, the other half visibly salivates. The pineapple is placed beside a plate of silver knives. Everyone waits. The hostess slices it herself, carefully, reverently, and distributes tiny wedges no larger than postage stamps. Guests accept their portion as if receiving communion. One man closes his eyes and says, "It's like being kissed by the sun." You chew slowly. The flavor is bright, electric. It fizzes slightly against your tongue. You realize this may be the only time this entire week that anyone will actually eat pineapple. Even at a fruit viewing, the fruit is mostly theory. Later, as you thank the hostess and prepare to leave, she takes you aside and shows you a small cabinet. Inside is a row of pineapple portraits, tiny oil paintings and etchings, each featuring a different fruit. "This one," she says, tapping the frame, "was from my uncle's voyage to Antigua. They served it with cream and cloves. I was 7. I've never forgotten it." You nod solemnly, aware you've just witnessed something deeply personal and somehow fruit-related. As you step back out onto the street, the sky has shifted into that watercolor shade of gray that only London manages to wear well. You pull your coat tighter and glance over your shoulder, half expecting the pineapple to follow you home. And maybe in a way it does, because now you understand. The pineapple isn't just about taste, it's about memory, about spectacle, about owning, even briefly, a piece of someplace else. A golden fragment of empire cradled in your hands. And tomorrow someone else will do the same. By this point, you've attended pineapple dinners, pineapple plays, and a fruit viewing that felt more like an audience with royalty than a tea party. You've sniffed, admired, even tasted the golden guest of honor. So naturally, you now find yourself on a carriage bound for the countryside. Because what's missing from this strange journey is a visit to the very place where Britain's most determined fruit fanciers tried to grow their own. That's right, we're going to the pineapple pits. Your carriage lurches through muddy roads bordered by neatly hedged estates, eventually pulling up to a grand but slightly overgrown manor. Its owner, a baronet with excellent boots and questionable sideburns, greets you with the enthusiasm of someone about to show off an invention that hasn't quite exploded yet. "Welcome to the hothouse," he says, eyes twinkling behind spectacles thick enough to start fires of their own. You follow him through a series of increasingly humid rooms until you arrive at a structure that looks like a conservatory mated with a very stubborn chimney. Glass panels let in the weak English sun, while brick flues run under the ground in zigzagging patterns. "This," he declares, "is where magic happens." The air smells of damp soil, warm manure, and faint desperation. Along a raised bed, nestled in neat rows, sit half a dozen green pineapples in various stages of defiant growth. Their spiky leaves stretch upward like victorious fists. Welcome to pineapple forcing. Historians agree that by the mid-18th century, Britain was deep in the throes of pineapple mania, and predictably, the wealthy wanted to grow their own. The only problem? Britain's climate was about as suited to pineapples as it was to beach volleyball, so they improvised. Using pineapple pits, or stoves, wealthy landowners constructed elaborate brick-lined trenches filled with compost, heated with rotting manure and coal fires, and topped with angled glass to trap every precious ray of sunlight. It was like trying to raise a tropical baby in a Victorian greenhouse powered by compost and blind optimism. You lean in to examine one of the plants. It's about the size of a cabbage, though far more smug. A gardener in a long apron gently mists it with lukewarm water, then covers it with a cloche, like tucking in a very expensive, very spiky toddler. "How long does it take?" you ask. The baronet grins. 2 to 3 years, with luck. 4, if the winter's cruel. But when it fruits... Oh, when it fruits... He trails off, overcome by emotion. You wonder briefly whether he's ever wept over a pineapple. You suspect yes. The process is absurdly inefficient. Each plant takes up space, heat, labor, and attention. Some don't even fruit. Others rot halfway through. But when a pineapple does bloom under British skies, it becomes an instant local legend. One estate kept its single pineapple on display in the village pub for a full week. Another sent a fruit to London in a velvet-lined coach, where it was paraded through streets like a royal heir. Still another, your hosts in fact, had a pineapple portrait commissioned before the fruit was even ripe. You're shown the painting. It hangs in the drawing room, flanked by ancestors and dogs. The pineapple is center stage, surrounded by soft-focus lilies and a faint sense of superiority. Your host sighs. It never fully ripened, poor thing. But what presents, don't you think? You agree, the pineapple has gravitas. In the hothouse, the gardener explains how temperature is managed with a complicated system of vents, dung heaps, and sheer guesswork. You have to feel it, he says, placing one hand on the soil. Know when she's ready to grow, when she's resting. You nod, pretending this makes sense. He shows you a ledger filled with pineapple data, dates planted, temperature notes, and entries like refused to grow, sulking, or possibly upset by neighbors' success. You learn that gardeners sometimes sang to the plants. One estate had a boy whose job it was to read poetry to the pineapples, the theory being that fruit responds to iambic pentameter. Historians still argue whether this was sincere agricultural science or just a way to keep the boy busy and out of the pantry. Either way, it's charming. Back in the main house, you're served tea with candied pineapple. From Barbados, the baronet admits, with a sheepish smile. Mine are still thinking about it. You understand. Because by now, it's clear that growing a pineapple in Britain during the Georgian era was less about having the fruit, and more about proving you could. It was a horticultural arms race. an act of domestic empire building, and in some ways, a metaphor. The pineapple, difficult and demanding, became a stand-in for colonial ambition. Something exotic, controlled, displayed. Not for its utility, but its symbolism. Its difficulty was the point. Later, as you walk the grounds, you spot a small statue tucked behind a hedge. It's a pineapple, of course, carved in stone and wearing a tiny crown. You pause, half expecting it to speak. Instead, a breeze picks up, rustling the ivy and carrying with it the warm, sweet scent of the hothouse. You breathe it in, and for a moment, you understand what all the fuss was about. Not just the flavor, the fantasy. You wake the next morning still faintly smelling of peat moss and hot fruit. Your boots are crusted with greenhouse soil. Your cuffs have a suspicious stain you hope is only compost tea. And your dreams were haunted by pineapples speaking in iambic pentameter. All perfectly normal for someone knee-deep in Georgian produce pageantry. Today, though, you're heading to a quieter place. Not a mansion, not a hothouse, and certainly not a theater. You're going to a library, but not just any library. A gentleman's personal collection, tucked away in a study paneled with dark wood and lined with the scent of aged leather, beeswax polish, and whatever ink is made from crushed ambition. You're here because your host, a retired sea captain with a limp and a fondness for rum at midday, claims to have the most complete collection of pineapple writings in private hands. And yes, such a thing exists. You ease into an armchair beside a roaring fire that seems a little too energetic for this hour, and your host thuds down a stack of well-worn books and pamphlets. All real, he says, with the pride of a man who once harpooned a squid that turned out to be laundry. The first book you open is a gardening manual from 1773, its title so long it wraps around the cover, a comprehensive treatise on the forcing of the Ananas comosus and related tropic fruitage with regard to the British soil and temperature therein. Inside are intricate diagrams of pineapple pits, advice on the angle of winter sunlight, and one anxious margin note. Suspect Mrs. Danvers overwatering. Watch her. You chuckle softly. Another volume is a cookbook, though calling it that feels generous. It's more of a culinary dare, filled with recipes like pineapple ragu with calf's brain, and jellied ananas in aspic with nutmeg and onion vapors. You shudder. They ate this! Your host nods solemnly. Twice. Historians still argue whether these bizarre pineapple recipes were actually served or just written to impress. After all, much of Georgian cuisine was equal parts theater and punishment. There's also a small red journal, its leather cover soft as plum skin. Inside, delicate handwriting describes a trip to a dinner party where the pineapple centerpiece was placed on a spinning pedestal. So that no side should suffer envy, the writer notes, in what is either sincere admiration or devastating sarcasm. You turn the page and find a hand-drawn diagram of the table, complete with guest positions and notes like Lord Barry spilled wine twice, and Lady Summers asked if it was edible. Gasp from hostess. A folded letter slips from between the pages. It's addressed to Dear Aunt Mab, and describes in breathless detail the unveiling of a pineapple under fireworks during a garden fete. The fruit was hoisted on a pulley system, it reads. The band played a march. Mrs. Cowper swooned. You grin. This is the good stuff. But then, your host produces the most peculiar item of all, a slim treatise titled The Philosophic Pineapple, Reflections on Empire, Taste, and the Fruits of Labor. Published anonymously and filled with florid prose, it suggests, perhaps unironically, that the pineapple is the most moral of all fruits. Why? Because the author insists it teaches patience, demands effort, and offers fleeting pleasure, much like virtue or good upholstery. You're not sure whether to laugh or underline the quote. The essay goes on to argue that pineapples, while foreign, have been made British through cultivation and ceremony. We do not simply eat them, we redeem them. You blink. The rhetoric is so lofty, it needs its own staircase. And yet, it speaks volumes about the mindset of the age. Colonial pride, wrapped in velvet language, carried on the back of a fruit no one had heard of a century before. Your host leans back in his chair and sighs. Funny, isn't it? A fruit that doesn't belong here becomes a mirror, shows us what we think we are. You nod slowly. It's the first genuinely philosophical thing you've heard all week that doesn't involve syrup or centerpiece placement. And suddenly, this whole pineapple saga feels different, not just absurd, but revealing. Because behind the powdered wigs and silver trays, the rotating pedestals and pineapple poetry, there's something deeper. A culture obsessed with appearances, with mastery over nature, and with defining itself through what it could possess. Even temporarily, even if it's spoiled before dessert. Later, your host shows you one last item. A pineapple scrapbook filled with clippings from newspapers and magazines, all celebrating notable pineapple events. There's an engraving of a pineapple presented to the king, an advertisement for pineapple-shaped snuff boxes, and a caricature of a gentleman trying to court a lady by comparing her to a well-ripened ananas. Spoiler, it didn't work. As you close the scrapbook, you notice one last note scrawled in faded ink on the inside cover. All this for a fruit I've never tasted. You sit back in your chair, suddenly aware of the fire's warmth, the smell of old glue and dust, and the quiet ticking of a long case clock in the corner. The pineapple's journey has passed through science, fashion, literature, and absurd performance. And now here it is, sitting quietly in ink and paper. The fruit as archive. And you, dear sleeper, are its final witness tonight. You leave the gentleman's library feeling oddly reverent, as though you've just wandered out of a cathedral built entirely from fruit. The air outside feels colder now, sharper, like it knows you've just touched the sacred scrolls of pineapple history. The damp cobblestones glisten in the early evening mist, and you pull your coat tighter around you. Tonight, you're headed somewhere less grand, but no less important. The kitchens. Because if anyone in Georgian England truly understood the pineapple, not as an emblem, not as a metaphor, but as a task, it was the cooks. You enter through the servants' door of a large townhouse, where the scullery is already alive with the hiss of boiling pots and the thunk of knives on wooden blocks. The heat is glorious, a wall of comfort after the fog outside. Your face steams slightly as you step past rows of hanging herbs and the haunting stare of a stuffed pheasant mounted above the pantry door. The cook, Mrs. Brammer, short, wiry, and coated in a light dusting of flour, waves you in with a ladle. Mind your toes, and no stealing the custard. You wouldn't dare. The pineapple in question sits in the center of the prep table, looking both regal and completely in the way. It's already been washed, gently towel-dried, and set upon a decorative pewter plate. "It's for a pie," Mrs. Brammer says. Her ladyship wants surprise and wit in the final course. You watch as she deftly trims the skin, slicing away the spiked armor to reveal the pale yellow treasure beneath. The scent immediately cuts through the savory stew air, a blast of tropical brightness in a room dominated by goose fat and onion. She slices it into chunks, sprinkles it with sugar, and sets it aside. Then she begins rolling pastry with a wooden pin that looks like it's seen battle. "Pineapple's a pest," she mutters. "All this fuss, and most of them just want to see it, not taste it, like having a pet lion in the parlor." You ask how often she gets to work with them. Once every few months, if the season's right. Maybe more if his lordship's feeling competitive. She smirks. "Had one Christmas where we had 3 in the house, stank up the cellar something fierce." She pulls out a small recipe book, dog-eared, stained, and filled with notes like, "Do not trust Mrs. Parkins," and "Turnip pudding Suntour's disaster." On one page, in her tight slanted script, is a recipe for pineapple tart with clove custard. You bake it slow, she says, or it turns stringy, and you don't add too much spice. Let the fruit talk for itself. You nod solemnly. The pineapple must be heard. As she works, other dishes begin to come together. A molded jelly shaped like a swan is carried out on a silver tray. A tureen of soup is poured into a china bowl shaped like a turtle. Georgian cuisine, you realize, is 1 part nourishment and 3 parts stagecraft. The pastry is filled, crimped, and placed into the oven, which is monitored by a boy whose entire job is to sit and turn the spit and occasionally yell if anything catches fire. He's been burned 6 times, has 0 eyebrows, and seems perfectly cheerful. While the tart bakes, Mrs. Brammer gives you a quick tour of the other pineapple-related dishes she's attempted over the years. Pineapple pudding with bread soaked in cream, pineapple marmalade served with veal, pineapple boiled in wine and served cold. Pineapple ice, once, at the Duke's midsummer ball. Froze our eyebrows off making that one, she says. You're beginning to see that while pineapples were rare and expensive, they also inspired culinary experiments that bordered on madness. And while some of them succeeded, like the tart currently turning golden behind the oven door, others were quietly buried behind the stables. Historians still argue whether pineapple was truly beloved for its taste or merely endured for the prestige it carried. Some period descriptions refer to it as unctuous or meaty, while others call it sweet air in the mouth. No one quite agrees, but one thing is clear: it made people bold and possibly reckless. The oven bell rings, an actual bell hung with string and optimism, and Mrs. Brammer pulls out the tart. It smells divine. Butter, caramelized sugar, citrus, and something floral that makes your stomach rumble in appreciation. She cuts a slice, plates it with a drizzle of rosewater syrup, and hands you a fork. You take a bite, and, well, it's like biting into a sunbeam that stopped in for tea. Warm, tart, sweet, lightly spiced. The pastry flakes like it's flirting with you. The pineapple, finally, is doing something. You nod, then nod again. Then forget to speak for a full 10 seconds. Mrs. Brammer looks smug. Told you, let it talk. You finish the slice in silence, utterly converted. The pineapple has moved from spectacle to sensation. No poems, no candles, no velvet cushions, just sugar and heat, and the quiet genius of a cook who's been making magic for people who barely know her name. You thank her as you leave, and she waves you off with her ladle. Come back when we try to roast one. It's a right mess. As you step into the cool night, your breath fogs in the air, and the taste of pineapple still lingers. Bright, buttery, impossible to pin down. You've seen the fruit admired, displayed, painted, and paraded. But here, you finally understood it. You step back onto the cobblestones with a full belly and the warm fuzziness of someone who's just been given both dessert and enlightenment. The pineapple tart still hums on your tongue like a tiny brass band of flavor, and the kitchen's glow seems to follow you all the way back through the misty streets. But the pineapple's tale isn't finished. Tonight, you're attending what can only be described as the pinnacle of pineapple-related madness. A Georgian masquerade ball, thrown by a marquis who reportedly owns not 1, but 5 pineapples, and has decided to base the entire evening's theme around them. Because of course he has. The house, when you arrive, looks like Versailles collided with a novelty fruit shop. The windows are lit with amber-colored lanterns carved into pineapple shapes. The hedges have been pruned into leafy topknots. There's even a papier-mâché pineapple archway, under which a string quartet performs a tropical-sounding gavotte. You hesitate at the threshold. Not because you're overwhelmed, but because the footman checking invitations is wearing a pineapple mask. And you don't mean one decorated with pineapples. You mean he is literally wearing a golden spiked replica of the fruit on his face. You step through and realize, with awe and concern, that everyone is dressed this way. Ladies in pineapple print gowns. Gentlemen in pineapple brocade waistcoats. One particularly bold guest is wearing a headdress shaped like a fruit bowl, with a very realistic pineapple perched jauntily on top. And at the center of it all is the host, the Marquis, tall, powdered, bejeweled, and draped in head-to-toe pineapple embroidery. He raises a glass of sparkling wine and declares, "Let us toast to the fruit of courage, the symbol of refinement, and the flavor of dominance." You're not sure if he's joking. You raise your glass anyway. Historians still argue whether these pineapple balls were sincere tributes to the fruit, tongue-in-cheek excess, or just one more excuse to outdo one another socially. Probably all three. The evening progresses in surreal, spiky glory. The waltz is replaced by a choreographed, tropical promenade, during which couples swirl past papier-mâché palm trees and a mechanical fountain that smells suspiciously of canned juice. The pineapple centerpiece, because of course there is one, is enormous, almost certainly fake. Possibly papier-mâché, possibly wood, possibly real but deeply overripe. It's been painted with gold leaf and sits on a throne of moss and crystal. You approach and hear one guest whisper, "I hear it was gifted by the King of Spain." Another retorts, No, it was grown on Mars. He's just very advanced." You retreat. The dessert buffet includes no fewer than 12 pineapple-based dishes, most of which defy logic, and several that defy gravity. There's pineapple custard in eggshells, pineapple caramel poured over candied rose petals, a pineapple croquembouche so tall it's been stabilized with string, and a very worried footman. One dish is simply titled Pineapple and Awe. It tastes like regret and ambition. You dance, of course. It's that kind of night. You swirl past gilt mirrors and chandeliers shaped like fruit baskets, your steps syncing with the gentle rhythm of a minuet named Ananas Royale. Your partner, wearing a mask studded with pineapple seeds, leans in and says, "Do you think the pineapples know?" "Know what?" "That we've made them gods." You think about it. You think about the pineapples you've seen, staring from pedestals, propped up on stage, glowering from portraits. You nod. Later, the Marquis invites guests to the Pineapple Parade, a brief procession through the ballroom during which each of his 5 pineapples is presented on a velvet cushion and given a short poem or compliment. One is praised for its symmetry and silent confidence. Another is admired for its refusal to become pie. You suspect the wine has begun to take effect. The final pineapple, however, is treated with near religious reverence. It is said to have been passed down through 3 generations, never cut, never eaten, just admired. There are rumors it has a name, possibly Gerald. It is not clear whether this is all an elaborate joke or the most committed fruit-based ceremony in British history. You applaud anyway. Near midnight, the orchestra strikes up a closing tune. The Pineapples Fare Well. It's oddly somber. Guests sway gently, the gold leaf on their masks flaking ever so slightly with every nod and twirl. There's a feeling in the air. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of wistful wonder. As though everyone knows that by morning, the spell will break, the fruit will rot, and the gowns will go back into storage. But for now, the pineapple is eternal. You step outside just before the final toast. The sky is clear, the stars cold and distant. From the garden, you can still hear the laughter, the music, the clinking of absurdly tiny spoons against absurdly expensive crystal. And in the shadows by the hedge, you spot a servant carefully carrying one of the pineapples back to its protective case, as if tucking it in. You wonder if it dreams. You wake late the next morning, your head filled with gilded masks, 12-layer desserts, and the soft, haunting refrain of the Pineapple's Farewell. It lingers in your ears like a lullaby written by someone who's only ever eaten sugar for breakfast. Today, you're keeping things a bit more grounded. Though by Georgian standards, grounded still involves powdered wigs and social warfare. You're attending a dinner party, not one of those sprawling banquets for 60 people where the fish course arrives 2 hours late, and half the guests are already tipsy on shrub. No, this is a small, fashionable affair. 6 or 7 guests, all hand-picked for their conversational sparkle, wit, or at the very least, their willingness to talk about pineapples with the appropriate level of awe. You arrive early, ushered in through a hallway that smells faintly of beeswax and imported citrus. The hostess greets you warmly, her gown a riot of embroidery and pineapple motifs. Yes, again. You begin to suspect there was an entire textile market just for tropical fruit aesthetics. Dinner is held in a high-ceilinged room lit by flickering candlelight and the occasional nervous servant carrying tureens like precious cargo. The table is long, but not too long, just enough that you can hear the guest to your left and squint politely at the one across from you. The centerpiece is, predictably, a pineapple. This one's been nestled among rose petals and decorative quail eggs. One guest leans forward and whispers, "I think it's real." Another says, "I heard it's been here since last Thursday." A third mutters, "It's definitely starting to turn." You smile and admire it anyway. The first course arrives. A delicate soup with faint notes of nutmeg and someone's opinion about taxes. Conversation flows with the wine. Casual, pointed, occasionally absurd. You overhear someone arguing that pineapples are proof of British agricultural superiority. Someone else insists they're simply beautiful liars, pretending to be abundant when they're really just rare and uncooperative. Historians still argue whether Georgian dinner parties were sincere exercises in refinement or merely battlegrounds for social dominance. Possibly both, as evidenced by the man 2 seats down who compliments the hostess's pineapple, then quickly adds, "Though of course, mine was twice as large at last week's gathering." You resist the urge to throw bread at him. The main course is duck with orange glaze and some kind of molded potato that wobbles with unsettling confidence. The pineapple re-enters the conversation, not as a flavor, but as a story. One guest recounts the time they saw a pineapple carried through Bath on a silver platter, followed by a small dog and 3 flute players. Another insists he once saw one thrown into a fireplace during an argument about botany. No one blinks. These stories are entirely plausible. The pineapple, you realize, serves as more than decor. It's a social lubricant, a safe topic, a vessel for one-upmanship, memory, fantasy. Like an exotic pet that doesn't bark or shed, eventually, dessert arrives. A pineapple trifle in a crystal bowl as wide as your face. Layers of sponge, cream, candied fruit, and the occasional almond sliver peek out like confused passengers on a trifle barge. It's delicious, of course, and slightly boozy, enough that the guest beside you finally admits she once rented a pineapple and lied about growing it herself. "I was young," she says, licking her spoon, "and it looked so trustworthy." The hostess pretends not to hear. After dessert, the conversation meanders. Politics, art, whether pineapple wine counts as actual wine. Someone offers a toast to the fruit itself, standing up with dramatic flair and saying, "To the pineapple," which teaches us that beauty can be expensive, inconvenient, and slightly sticky. It gets a laugh. You slip away to stretch your legs and find yourself wandering the hallway, where portraits of stern ancestors frown down at you, many of whom seem to be holding pineapples. Either that, or very aggressive artichokes. You're not sure anymore. In the drawing room, post-dinner port is served with tiny pineapple biscuits. You nibble one, smile, and let the evening settle around you like a cashmere shawl. Somewhere, someone is reciting poetry. Another guest is gently humming. and the pineapple still sits at the center of the table, glowing softly in the candlelight. Uncut, untouched, still more symbol than snack. You think of all the pineapple's roles: muse, model, monarch of the fruit bowl, and now host. Not to be consumed, but to preside. It watches, as always, quietly victorious. Later, as coats are fetched and parting bows exchanged, someone finally asks the question that's been hovering all evening. So, will it be eaten? The hostess smiles mysteriously. That, she says, depends entirely on how tomorrow goes. And just like that, the pineapple is legend once more. The morning after the dinner party finds you strolling through a public garden in London, bundled against the chill, the scent of yesterday's pineapple trifle still a phantom on your breath. You pass frock-coated walkers, parasol-bearing ladies, and small children tossing stale bread to ducks with expressions of deep moral purpose. Today's excursion isn't about aristocrats, balls, or overly theatrical dessert presentations. It's about ordinary people and what the pineapple meant to them. You arrive at a modest but lively produce market tucked behind rows of narrow Georgian shop fronts. The awnings flap in the wind, stalls are stacked high with root vegetables and limp-looking herbs, and somewhere a fishmonger is singing a ballad about haddock and heartbreak. A good place for groceries. A less expected place to encounter status fruit. But as you wander deeper into the rows, you spot it. A lone pineapple sitting atop a barrel like it owns the market. A handwritten sign dangles from its crown. 3 shillings to view. Do not touch. You chuckle, of course. This is one of the many rental pineapples, a curious and oddly brilliant phenomenon of Georgian enterprise. Because the fruit was so rare and expensive, some enterprising souls discovered you could charge people to simply look at one, or rent it for display at your own dinner party, or in some cases, repeatedly rent the same pineapple until it rotted and collapsed in on itself, like a sugary star. The vendor, a tall man with sideburns and a voice like a wooden drawer opening, catches your gaze and nods proudly. She's a good one, eh? 14 days on the circuit and still standing. You ask who's rented her. Oh, all sorts. Lawyers, parsons, that lady what writes for the ladies' paper. Had a poet try to kiss her last Tuesday. I said, "Sir, that costs extra." You grin. The pineapple as accessory has become something like a social costume. Rent one, place it on your mantel or dining table, and bask in the silent assumption that you, too, are cultured and probably well-traveled. Historians still argue whether these rented pineapples were a widespread practice or simply a clever urban myth amplified by gossip columns and caricaturists. But the evidence suggests at least some people took the scheme very seriously. You wander the market a bit longer, noticing how many things now bear the pineapple's image. There's a barber's sign shaped like the fruit. A tea tin illustrated with a smiling pineapple holding a parasol. A poster advertising a traveling act called The Pineapple Twins. One plays harp, one juggles geese. No comment. Even in more modest circles, the pineapple had made it. Not just as food, but as a symbol of hospitality, warmth, and welcome. Georgian hostesses placed carved pineapples above doorways or embroidered them into cushions. There are even rumors of small, affordable faux pineapple centerpieces made of wax or papier-mâché for those who wanted the aesthetic without the financial devastation. You duck into a nearby cafe and order tea, sitting by the window as carriages roll by. A family walks past, the children pointing at a shop display of pineapple-shaped candies. One tugs his mother's sleeve, demanding to know if those are what kings eat. Probably. The waiter brings your tea with a small slice of cake. Pineapple glazed, he says with a wink. You take a bite. It's less elaborate than Mrs. Brammer's tart, but still good. Gentle, sweet, slightly chewy, and faintly exotic, like someone telling you a bedtime story in another accent. You look around the cafe and see a small bookshelf. and nestled among the dog-eared volumes is a pamphlet titled Pineapple Virtues, a treatise on manners and fruit by an anonymous gentleman. You flip it open and read a few lines. To place the pineapple upon your table is to declare, I am generous, I am worldly, I own a hothouse and also possibly the souls of several gardeners. Charming. You learn that pineapples were sometimes used in marriage proposals. One story tells of a young man who left a pineapple on his beloved's doorstep with a ribbon and a note that read, As rare and fine as this, so is your affection to me. She accepted. They wed. The pineapple was preserved in brandy and kept in a jar for 20 years. Another tale, perhaps apocryphal, tells of a gentleman who carved a pineapple from marble and presented it to his intended bride. She fainted from delight, or perhaps confusion. Outside, a light rain begins to fall. You sip your tea and reflect on how far the pineapple has come. From Caribbean shores to the hands of fishmongers and florists, artists and architects, poets and party planners. No longer confined to gilded halls or royal dinners, it now lounges comfortably in everyday life. It may still be expensive, it may still be impractical, but it has become, against all odds, familiar. The waiter returns to refill your cup, and noticing your pamphlet says, Funny fruit, that. My gran said she once had a friend who painted one every day for a year. Said it helped her stay cheerful. You nod. You understand now. The pineapple doesn't just belong to the powerful anymore. It belongs to anyone who's ever dreamed of sunshine during a foggy morning. Anyone who's ever saved for something beautiful. Anyone who's admired from afar, knowing they may never taste, but wanting to remember the shape of wonder anyway. You fold the pamphlet, tuck it back on the shelf, and step back into the drizzle with a faint smile on your lips. You leave the cafe with damp shoulders and the distinct feeling that you're being followed, not by a person, but by the persistent ghost of a fruit. It's in the windows, the signs, the conversation of strangers. The pineapple has become the city's secret mascot, and now it's leading you somewhere older, quieter. You follow the curve of a narrow lane until it opens into a small courtyard hemmed in by ivy-covered walls. There, tucked between a chapel and a charity school, is a building that looks more like a misplaced sugar cube than a place of serious study. This is one of London's earliest botanical societies, a small, learned institution where scholars of the Georgian age debated plants with the seriousness of generals planning a war. You step inside, and it's as if time forgets to follow. The air smells like vellum and camphor. Dust motes drift in slow ballet through slanted sunlight. Shelves overflow with dried specimens, hand-colored drawings, and things in jars you're politely choosing not to examine too closely. And there, in the center of the main display room, under a glass dome, sits a preserved pineapple. Or at least what used to be one. It's shrunken now, brown and withered, like a dried starfish in retirement. But still recognizable. Still noble. Next to it, a placard reads, Ananas camosus, grown at Kew, preserved for posterity, 1782. You sit on a creaky bench and study it. Once, this fruit was the subject of royal letters, the prize of botanical experiments, the obsession of gentlemen gardeners who would rather ruin a season than admit defeat to a tropical plant. And for good reason. Growing a pineapple in Georgian England was an ordeal. You recall what you've learned so far. Pineapples needed heat, humidity, patience, and an entire team of underpaid gardeners whispering encouragement to them in the dead of winter. And this place? This place was where many of those horticultural dreams were tested and shared. A curator, small, spry, and probably older than most of the books, spots your interest and shuffles over. Fine specimen, isn't it? He says, peering through the glass like it's a diamond. We believe this one belonged to Sir Lionel Staplehurst. Grew it himself. Wrote a sonnet about it. Terrible meter. You ask what made the pineapple such a botanical obsession, not just a social one. Well, he says, lowering himself onto the bench beside you with the slowness of molasses in January. It was the ultimate test. To coax a tropical fruit from the gray, damp soil of England, that was wizardry, a bit of alchemy. And unlike tulips or roses, this one could feed you, at least theoretically. He pulls a leather-bound notebook from his pocket and opens to a page filled with spidery handwriting. Here's one gardener's record. Took 2 years from sprout to harvest, used manure-heated beds, oiled paper to catch light, and had to fight off fungus, beetles, and a particularly territorial toad. You raise your eyebrows. Oh yes, he nods. Toads love pineapples? Probably something about the acidity, or the drama. Historians still argue whether botanical societies helped democratize pineapple cultivation or simply served as gatekeepers for the wealthy elite. On one hand, they published growing guides and encouraged experimentation. On the other, they were known to hoard techniques like jealous alchemists protecting the recipe for gold. You stroll the rest of the room with the curator narrating behind you like a bedtime podcast. There's an original watercolor of a pineapple plant in bloom, green fronds like fireworks, fruit mid-development, tiny blue flowers still visible at the base. That's one of the earliest illustrations done in England, he says. People wept when they saw it. Or possibly sneezed. Moldy paper does that. There's a drawer labeled Ananas Trials, filled with seed samples and dried roots. Another marked Tropical Pits, failed models, containing sketches of heating systems that apparently exploded or caught fire on contact with reality. You find a volume titled Letters on the Cultivation of Curious Plants, and thumb through page after page of pineapple entries. My specimen has grown dull and refuses to turn yellow. I suspect melancholy. Lord Whistledown's gardener reports premature fruiting after exposure to excessive fiddling. The Queen's Pit yielded 1 fine pineapple and 3 disappointments. There's a deep human comedy to all of it. Ambition tangled with nature, pride wrestling with compost. You realize the pineapple wasn't just a fruit to these people. It was a challenge, a riddle, a living, fragrant measure of one's control over the natural world. And sometimes, just sometimes, the fruit won. As you exit, the curator calls after you. If you see a live one, tip your hat. That lot's been through more drama than a royal divorce. You promise you will. Outside, the wind has picked up and the leaves are rustling with that dry, papery whisper that always makes you feel like history is talking behind your back. You pause at the garden gate and glance back through the window. The shriveled pineapple under glass catches a shaft of afternoon sun and glows faintly amber. A relic, a reminder, a monument to patience. And you wonder, not for the first time, how many people spend years growing something just to look at it once, then never taste it at all. The wind tugs at your coat as you leave the quiet sanctuary of botanical obsession behind. The air has that crisp, late-day sharpness that makes everything feel a little more theatrical, like London is staging its own sleepy opera in gray and gold. You walk with no fixed destination now, letting the rhythm of your boots on cobblestones lead you wherever the pineapple's story wants to go next. It leads you to architecture, which might seem odd at first. What do bricks and mortar have to do with a tropical fruit? But then you turn a corner and stop dead in your tracks, because there it is, an enormous stone pineapple perched confidently atop a garden gate. Not painted, not subtle, not even pretending to blend in. Just a giant pineapple-shaped finial staring down at the street like a sentry from some fruity alternate dimension. You've arrived at one of the many Georgian homes where pineapple motifs were carved directly into the structure, a trend that swept through architecture like Rococo frosting. The pineapple, you realize, was not just a dinner guest or a garden diva. It became a literal symbol of welcome, chiseled into cornices, wrought into iron fences, and sculpted in stone atop entrance pillars, door knockers, even stair banisters. You could not throw a cravat in Georgian England without hitting someone who wanted their house to announce, "Hello, We are tasteful. And yes, we might own a hothouse. A passing local sees you gawking at the fruit on a plinth and nods knowingly. Ah, the old ananas pillar. Good luck charm, some say. Historians still argue whether the pineapple in architecture was truly meant to signify hospitality, or if it was more of a coded flex. Look what I can afford to reference. A way to flash tropical credentials without having to keep a wilting fruit on hand at all times. You step closer, tracing your fingers over the cold, weathered stone. The sculptor has captured the detail surprisingly well. The pointed scales, the curling leaves, even a bit of natural asymmetry. This wasn't an idle flourish. Someone meant this. And it's not alone. As you wander through the city's older quarters, you begin noticing pineapple motifs everywhere. A brass pineapple on the latch of a townhouse door. A row of garden urns shaped like pineapples, though one is sadly chipped and now resembles a mutant artichoke. A fireplace mantle where a tiny pineapple peeks from between Greek columns, as if saying, "Even here, yes, me too." You duck into a stationery shop just to warm up your hands and find an entire shelf of pineapple-shaped wax seals. The shopkeeper offers you one with a wink. For invitations to scandalous suppers only. You thank him and pocket a small stamped card that reads, "Ananas admits you." You have no idea to what. Outside again, you reach the Royal Pavilion, a place so over the top that if it could speak, it would probably sigh dramatically and ask for a chaise lounge. Though not strictly Georgian, its design echoes the same spirit. Domes, minarets, and yes, pineapple spires like sugary rocket ships ready to blast off in the name of hospitality. Pineapples weren't just status symbols, they became design language. You didn't just own one, you signaled with it. It became shorthand for elegance, wealth, openness, and a taste for a little bit of the absurd. At one stately home, the grand staircase boasts pineapple-shaped newel posts. A footman whispers as you pass, "Rub the top for luck, or for pudding. Depends who you ask." You do. It feels smooth and cold, like the dreams of a gardener gone too long without sun. You begin to imagine Georgian architects holding serious meetings about exactly how pineapply a residence should be. We're thinking 2 pineapples for the east wing and 1 discreet pineapple above the water closet. Too much? Yes, someone probably replied. Add another on the chimney. And while this pineapple mania eventually faded, it left behind a curious legacy, a fruit that became a building block, a design icon, a silent greeter on homes where the fruit itself may never have entered the kitchen, let alone the mouth. It's funny to think of pineapples as guardians, standing atop walls and doorposts like tropical gargoyles with better taste in headwear. But there they are, still weathering centuries of soot and rain, still marking the spot where someone, long ago, decided that this place would be made more generous, more fashionable, more pineappled. As dusk falls, the stone fruit catches the fading light. Its silhouette against the indigo sky is oddly comforting. You tip your imaginary hat to it. After all, it stood there longer than you've been alive, and it hasn't blinked once. Night settles gently over the rooftops, wrapping the chimneys and finials, pineapple-shaped or otherwise, in a velvet hush. You wander back through lamplit streets, shoes tapping in a rhythm that somehow matches the cozy thump of your heartbeat. Your feet lead you not to another grand hall or sleepy garden, but to something humbler. A print shop, still glowing from within. The bell above the door jingles with a nostalgic little chime, like a memory dusted in ink. Inside, the smell of paper, oil, and possibility envelops you. This is where ideas get dressed up in typeface and paraded through polite society. And tonight, you're here for pineapple gossip. The printmaster, a thin man with inky fingers and an amused mustache, nods to you from behind a press the size of a pony. Looking for scandal or satire? Pineapples, you reply. He doesn't blink. Right aisle, between royal intrigue and potato cultivation. You find it. A shelf filled with Georgian prints, pamphlets, and illustrated broadsheets, all featuring the fruit in ways no serious botanist could have predicted. You flip through page after page and quickly discover that pineapples weren't just fashionable. They were funny. You start with a popular satire from 1785, titled The Pineapple Election. It depicts two candidates fighting over a single pineapple perched atop a throne, while citizens in wigs wave cutlery and chant for slices. One character, named Lord Jusiton, declares, "Only I may taste of the empire's fruit." It's ridiculous. It's also alarmingly accurate. The pineapple had become a tool of political satire, a stand-in for wealth, indulgence, colonial overreach, or just good old-fashioned aristocratic silliness. Caricaturists loved it. Nothing says out of touch, quite like someone fighting over a fruit that costs more than a horse. One famous cartoon shows a nobleman bowing to a pineapple while ignoring a hungry child. The caption reads, "'Tis better to feed vanity than mouths, a little pointed, a little smug, entirely Georgian." Historians still argue whether such satire was biting social critique or just playful mockery, designed more to sell papers than spark revolutions. Either way, the pineapple was an irresistible prop, visually striking, instantly recognizable, and absurdly rich in metaphor. You pull down a slim volume titled Tales from the Fruit Bowl, Parables for the Cultured Class. It includes the tale of a man who sells all his possessions to buy a pineapple seedling, only for it to bloom into a common cabbage. The moral? Desire often bears the fruit of disappointment, unless well fertilized. Another pamphlet, more serious in tone, debates whether pineapples symbolize hospitality or imported arrogance. The author uses words like Epicurean and decadent with the confidence of someone who has never peeled a pineapple in his life. And yet, even the critics can't help but admire the fruit. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone wants to nibble at the symbolism, whether to praise it, parody it, or stuff it into verse. The printmaster returns, holding a fresh page hot from the press. "You might like this," he says, handing it over. It's a theatrical poster. The Pineapple Mask. A tragedy in 3 acts and several recipes. You ask if it's real. "Oh yes," he says, "though the recipes are better than the acting." You imagine it now. Actors in gilded fruit helmets, monologuing about longing and citrus. A heroine torn between love and tropical ambition. A villain who hoards his pineapple behind a velvet curtain until the final act, when it's revealed to be wax. There are worse things to write plays about. You thank the printmaster and step outside again, pamphlet in hand, feeling oddly buoyant. The pineapple, once again, has shown you another face. The clown, the jester, the mirror held up to absurdity. Not just admired, but mocked. And in that mocking, remembered. As you walk, you picture Georgian households giggling over their morning cartoons. "Oh, look, dear, it's the Duke of Strudelborough riding a pineapple again. Do pass the jam." You glance up and see that someone's left a carved pineapple in a windowsill, its spines lit by candlelight, casting long shadows on the glass. Whether it's there to impress, amuse, or simply delight, doesn't really matter anymore. It just fits. The pineapple had conquered not just taste and status, but storytelling. It crept into papers, poems, jokes, and plays, becoming part of the cultural fabric in a way few fruits ever do. Not because it was sweet, or rare, or spiky, but because it was strange. And in a world filled with powdered wigs and rigid manners, strangeness was a secret revolution. The moon is out now, washing the city in a pale silver that turns every wet cobblestone into a tiny mirror. The shops have shuttered, the dinner parlors gone quiet, and the clatter of wheels has thinned to a lullaby rhythm of hooves on stone. You decide to keep walking. Soft footsteps, slow thoughts, still wrapped in the afterglow of satirical pineapples and melodramatic fruit plays. Eventually, your path takes you toward the outskirts of town. where the air smells less of ink and sugar and more of coal smoke and soil. Ahead, glowing with a soft amber light, you spot an estate with something that looks almost magical nestled in its walled gardens. A pineapple pit. You pause, breath curling like ghost script in the chill, and take it in. This is where the real drama happened. Long before the pineapple became a punchline in plays or an architectural flourish, it was the diva of the garden world, the tropical prima donna whose every whim had to be met with extraordinary measures. Growing one in England's climate was not just difficult, it was absurd. And yet, people tried. You're invited in by the head gardener, a man with sun-creased skin and fingernails that haven't been truly clean since George II was a boy. He's proud of his work, and rightly so. The garden smells of compost and citrus, and just a hint of burned something. Not a disaster, he assures you, just enthusiastic heating. He leads you toward the pineapple pit, which looks like a hybrid between a glass house and a secret bunker. Brick-lined, half submerged in the ground, with angled windows to trap sunlight. The interior is warm, muggy even, and smells of damp leaves and promise. This one's 6 months along, he says, gesturing toward a squat, leafy plant that does, in fact, bear the early shape of a pineapple. She's temperamental, doesn't like drafts, or being talked about in the third person. You nod solemnly. He explains the system. Hotbeds filled with manure, carefully managed for consistent heat. Vents that must be opened or closed depending on wind direction, cloud cover, and whether the moon looks judgmental that evening. It's an art, a science, and an emotional roller coaster. I lost one last year, he confesses. Turned sour before her time. Still haunts me. You can't help but laugh, gently. The pineapples are treated with more emotional investment than some family members. Historians still argue whether these elaborate hothouses were truly practical, or if they were simply expensive follies designed to showcase wealth and determination. Some say the cost of growing a single fruit could match the wages of a footman for an entire year. Others argue that once mastered, the system yielded consistent results for those who had the resources to maintain them. You peer closer at the plant. Its crown of leaves fans outward like a flamenco dancer mid-spin. The fruit is small but growing, each scale catching the lamplight like tiny bronze plates. You try to imagine the thrill of finally, after 2 years of careful tending, seeing it ripen. It's the waiting that gets you, the gardener says. You give it warmth, shade, company, and still, it grows on its own time, like royalty. Outside the pit, you spot another structure. A larger, domed glass house with iron ribs and a scent that immediately reminds you of lemon soap and old apothecaries. Welcome to the Pineapple Salon, the gardener grins, where the ladies come to gossip and the fruit comes to sulk. He's not wrong. Inside, the pineapples seem to pose under the filtered light, leaves rustling in the faint breeze. Some are almost ready, their golden skins gleaming like lacquered treasure. Others are still hard, green, and stubborn. Each one has a name tag. Most are names like Mildred, Augustus, or Beryl. One is named Debbie, you ask. She's feisty, he shrugs. Bit dramatic. You walk the rows, whispering hellos to each fruit, half expecting one to wink. The atmosphere is strangely reverent, more chapel than farm. The gardener tells you of rituals, soft music played at night, warm stones rotated to simulate sun, gardeners who swear talking to the plants helps. I once read a poem to one, he confesses, and it ripened a week early. You're not surprised, because this is no ordinary crop. This is a performance, a 2-year dance between patience and weather, devotion and decay, and the pineapple, for all its aristocratic associations, has become something more here. It's a living monument to hope. Hope that something delicate can thrive under pressure, that something strange can bloom in a place it was never meant to. As you prepare to leave, The gardener cuts a small, overripe pineapple from a lower shelf. "This one didn't meet standards," he says. "But she still smells sweet. Take her home." You carry her carefully, the warm weight of her in your hands like a sleepy cat. Outside, the stars have emerged, scattered across the velvet sky in indifferent glitter. You glance back at the greenhouse. The leaves inside still shimmer, quiet and dignified in their cultivated jungle. And for a brief moment you understand the madness of it all. The manure, the money, the music, the poetry read to fruit. Because once it ripens, when it finally ripens, it's not just food, it's a small golden victory. You cradle the rejected pineapple, soft around the edges, bruised like it's been in a polite fencing match, and begin the long walk back toward the heart of the city. The night has deepened into that hushed velvet stillness where even the gas lamps seem to flicker more quietly, and your footsteps echo like you're walking through a memory instead of a street. As the warm fruit nestles against your side, your thoughts drift from hothouses and horticultural hopes to something more domestic, more grounded in the daily reality of Georgian kitchens. Because for all the symbolism, all the satire and architectural flair, the pineapple was also, eventually, eaten. And so tonight, you imagine yourself slipping into a Georgian scullery, the clatter of copper pans, the scent of yeast, burnt sugar, and something possibly overboiled. You descend into the bustling world of the household cooks, the people tasked with transforming pineapples from garden gold to table glory. You pass through an arched servant's entrance and into the warmth of a kitchen just beginning to wind down after a long day. There's a woman at the table, flour on her elbows, peeling an apple with the precision of a surgeon. She looks up, sees the pineapple in your arms, and grins. "Another one for the pudding pile, then?" You nod. She clears a space and gestures you over. "Sit. I'll show you what to do with a fruit that's already thrown a tantrum." What follows is less a recipe and more a slow dance of rituals. She slices it carefully, removing the bruised bits and murmuring to herself, as if the pineapple might still be listening. The pieces go into a saucepan with sherry, cloves, and a spoonful of honey, simmered until the scent alone could bring tears to the eyes of a dowager countess. She tells you stories between stirs, how pineapple dishes became the crown jewel of Georgian banquets, and how the grander the dinner party, the more absurd the presentation. There were pineapples carved into swans, pineapple jellies that wobbled like political alliances, pineapple puddings served with firework displays or balanced atop wheels of cheese for contrast. Historians still argue whether the fruit was more often served fresh or stewed, as recipes varied wildly and were adapted depending on a host's access, taste, and desire to impress. Some claimed fresh pineapple was too intense, a flavor that shocked the palate, especially for diners more used to root vegetables and boiled mutton. One popular recipe she recites from memory is pineapple ratafia, a cordial made with brandy, fruit slices, sugar, and a few secret ingredients. "Dangerously nice," she says, "though it'll have you confessing state secrets by the third glass. You ask if pineapples were ever just eaten plainly, raw." She snorts. "Not if you paid what they paid. That fruit's getting dressed for dinner." And dressed they were. Pineapple ice creams, custards, charlottes, and the infamous pineapple and oyster pie. A recipe that has haunted more than one historian's dreams. It was, apparently, a thing. The cook pulls out a tattered copy of Hannah Glass's cookbook, opens it to a stained page, and reads, "To make a fine pineapple tart. First, take your pineapple, slice it, and lay it upon sugar and lemon peel." The recipe goes on for some time. It's detailed, it's proud, and it ends with a note. "Serve immediately, do not explain." She spoons a bit of the warm, stewed pineapple into a chipped porcelain bowl and hands it to you. Try. You do. The taste is soft and sharp, rich with the wine and clove, but unmistakably pineapple, bright and tangy, with just enough sweetness to make your toes curl a little. You eat slowly, each bite a small sigh. She nods in approval and starts cleaning the pan. As you sit there, you begin to understand why this fruit caused such a commotion, why it sparked gossip, ambition, satire, and stone monuments. Because beneath all the spectacle, it really is delicious. You think back to all those elite parties, where guests would politely nibble and feign indifference, while secretly weeping with joy on the inside. You think of the cooks like this one, nameless in the history books, who coaxed every possible ounce of flavor from a bruised fruit that probably cost more than their yearly wage. And you think of the absurdity of it all. The pineapple, despite its thorns and demands, became part of home. Translated from hothouse to hearth. Smuggled from aristocratic temples of taste into kitchens that smelled of coal and gossip and hope. Before you leave, the cook wraps a wedge of stewed pineapple in wax paper and presses it into your hand. For later, best before midnight, or it turns into a squash. You thank her, step out into the moonlit street once more, and realize you're smiling. The pineapple, in all its absurd grandeur, finally fed someone. And for once that someone was you. You wander on, your pocket now carrying the warm weight of stewed pineapple wrapped like a secret. London stretches sleepily around you, shutters drawn, chimneys puffing gently, and the occasional flicker of candlelight where someone else is still up. Perhaps with a midnight spoon or a melancholy ballad. You follow a quiet road that slopes toward the river, where a strange structure looms against the dark skyline. A grand townhouse with something tall and spiny on its roof. As you draw closer, you realize what it is. Of course, a pineapple, but not a real one. This one's entirely made of stone, and it's at least 6 feet tall, perched proudly atop a domed roof like some kind of tropical lighthouse. The building beneath it is stately, quiet, and entirely unaware of how bizarre it appears. You've arrived at one of the great architectural curiosities of the Georgian period, the Dunmore pineapple, or at least a detailed London imitation, because yes, others were built too. This isn't a tavern or a folly. It's a message, carved in stone, to the world. We worship this fruit, and we want you to know it. You lean against the fence and just take it in. The symmetry, the absurdity, the sheer effort required to shape each scale, each curve of the pineapple's leafy crown in cold, unforgiving stone. Historians still argue whether the original was meant as a joke, a celebration of imperial botany, or simply an eccentric's way of saying, "I'm not like the other dukes." Some claim it was a tribute to the fruit that had become a national obsession. Others insist it was a rebuke to the seriousness of neoclassical design, a wink from a man who wanted his house to smile back at him. Either way, it stands here now, quietly enormous in the moonlight. You can't help but wonder how it must have looked to the neighbors the day it was finished. Darling, the Grenvilles have installed a fruit on their roof. Of course they have. It's Wednesday. From a nearby garden bench, you get a better view of the building's lower facade, where the pineapple theme continues. Fruit carved into door lintels, spiral staircase banisters resembling coiled stems, and one iron gate whose finials are unmistakably based on pineapple leaves, despite their desperate attempt to look like ferns. And yet despite the silliness, it's beautiful. There's a strange serenity to the repetition of those botanical shapes. The fruit that once needed so much heat, water, and worry now sits quietly in stone, immune to weather and rot. You imagine it watching over the city like a proud, fruity sentinel. A soft cough draws your attention. An old groundskeeper is walking slowly along the gravel path, lantern in hand. He nods to you. "Fine work, isn't it?" he says, eyes lifting toward the stone fruit. You agree, then ask him why. Why all this effort, all this money for a pineapple? He chuckles. Because it made people feel extraordinary. Because it didn't belong here, not really, and yet, here it is. He pauses beside the gate, turning the key slowly in its lock. Back then, he continues, they built symbols, reminders. A pineapple on your gate meant you were worldly, curious, maybe a little ridiculous, but in a good way. People need their silliness. Helps them survive the serious bits. You glance up again. The stone pineapple gleams faintly under a shaft of moonlight. It looks serene. Slightly smug, maybe. Like it knows exactly how absurd it is, and rather enjoys it. You thank the groundskeeper and continue on, passing more homes now, some with less dramatic pineapples. Small carvings, brass doorknobs, even one wrought into a weather vane that spins lazily with the wind. The fruit has moved from table centerpiece to architectural punctuation, and each iteration feels like a wink from history, a little nod that says, we were here. We built something silly, and we liked it. There's something comforting in that. In a world of strict etiquette and powdered formality, they made room for a fruit that looked like a weapon, tasted like sunshine, and demanded a small fortune just to exist. And then, instead of keeping it secret, they carved it into stone and put it on the roof. Because sometimes history doesn't need to make sense. It just needs to stand tall and unapologetic, crowned with leaves, ready for weather and whimsy alike. There's a certain silence that only exists in the hour before dawn. It's not just quiet, it's expectant, like the city is holding its breath. And as you walk along the river now, the first tendrils of morning fog curling around the rails and lampposts, your mind turns one last time to the people who lived and breathed this pineapple dream. Not the dukes or duchesses, not the gardeners or architects, but the people at the very heart of all this delicious, ridiculous frenzy, the dinner guests. They were the ones who arrived in satin and cravat, hands gloved and stomachs empty, hoping for something extraordinary at the end of the table. They were the ones who gasped when the cloche was lifted to reveal the golden crown of the evening, a fresh, ripe pineapple. You slip into a memory now, a soft imagining of a Georgian supper in full swing. You're seated somewhere in the middle, not too far from the host to be ignored, not so close you're expected to compliment the wallpaper. The room is glowing with candles. The air is heavy with perfume, roast duck, and anticipation. There's music in the background, a delicate string quartet playing something sprightly yet polite. You sip from your wine glass, nod to someone discussing powdered wigs with alarming sincerity, and glance toward the head of the table. There it is, the pineapple, not sliced, not stewed, not even meant to be eaten. Just there, perched on a silver pedestal, illuminated like a holy relic. Guests eye it discreetly, as if it might suddenly speak. One lady leans toward you, her voice a stage whisper. They say it came from Jamaica. 4 weeks at sea, but still perfectly fresh. Another guest claims it was grown in a nearby hothouse, guarded by a boy who sings to it nightly. Swears it ripens better with handle. You're not sure whether to believe either of them, but it doesn't matter. Because here's the truth. No one cared where it came from. The pineapple wasn't about fact, it was about fantasy. It was the promise of elsewhere, dressed up in sugar and gold. It was the dream of the empire reduced to a single, absurdly thorny fruit. And for a dinner guest in the Georgian era, it was everything. Historians still argue whether the obsession reflected a deeper colonial psychology, an urge to own and consume the unfamiliar, or if it was simply the latest in a long line of luxury fads, no different than powdered noses or velvet waistcoats. Some even believe that the pineapple's ultimate power wasn't taste or cost, but mystery. After all, how many guests had actually tasted one? You overhear another conversation. This one about a man who rented a pineapple, brought it to 3 dinners, and then returned it uneaten so it could be displayed elsewhere. Still charged a full guinea, of course. One guest mutters that he once saw a pineapple used as a prop in a portrait. It wasn't even real. Painted wax. Still looked divine. And yet, despite all the pretense, the fuss, the rituals, it mattered. To be in the presence of a pineapple was to feel chosen, to be briefly elevated. You close your eyes and imagine what that moment must have felt like. Not the taste, the pause, the silence when the fruit arrived, and every guest leaned forward just slightly. The flicker of candlelight on golden flesh, the slow, practiced smile of the host, and then the quiet murmur that followed. Pineapple? Of course. You return to the present as a barge whistles softly in the fog, low and far away. The river sighs. That moment at the table, whether it ended in a bite or not, was enough. The pineapple did its job. It dazzled. It amused. It made people talk. And somewhere, in the middle of roast pheasant and lemon syllabub, it reminded everyone that life could still surprise them. The sky is beginning to shift now. No longer deep velvet, but something gentler. A gray-blue hush that signals morning without demanding it. Birds are starting to wake up, offering the occasional sleepy chirp from chimney tops and window ledges. You've walked the long arc of Georgian pineapple obsession, from soil to satire, architecture to appetite. And now, as the world begins to stir, there's only one place left to visit, the portrait gallery. You pass through iron gates and slip quietly inside a stately home-turned museum, where the air is soft with dust and varnish and old ambition. The gallery is mostly empty at this hour, your footsteps muffled on thick rugs as you wander past faces that once ruled salons, parlors, and drawing rooms. They look out from oil and canvas, powdered and perfect, their expression somewhere between smug and sleepy. And then, tucked between a portrait of a nobleman holding a spaniel and another adjusting a telescope, you find her. Or rather her pineapple. It's there, unmistakably, in the crook of her arm, like a floral bouquet made of armor. The woman gazes out calmly, her gown a flurry of taffeta, her wig defying structural logic. And cradled casually at her hip is the fruit of the century. Its ridges painted with such precision, you swear you can smell sugar and sunshine. She never tasted it, you're sure of that. But she held it like a scepter. Historians still argue whether such portraits were accurate or aspirational. Did the subject truly own the pineapple she posed with? Or was it loaned for the sitting? Some suggest artists kept studio pineapples, wax replicas, carefully detailed, used again and again to lend an air of tropical mystique to anyone who could afford the paint. But whether real or faux, its presence meant something. It said, "I am cultured. I am worldly. I have access to marvels you haven't even imagined." It was a status fruit, painted into memory. You move from portrait to portrait. In one, a small boy reaches for a pineapple on a platter, held just out of frame, like it might float away if he touches it. In another, a group of gentlemen are gathered around a supper table, gazing solemnly at a pineapple like it's about to deliver its will and testament. One painting shows a pineapple in a basket with plums and quinces. Another has it impaled on a skewer next to roast pork. You're not sure which is more offensive, but what's remarkable is how consistent it is. The fruit always appears just so, upright, proud, lit from one side like a royal subject. Even when surrounded by other bounty, it's the pineapple your eyes find first. That's its legacy. Not just taste, not just luxury, but focus. It demanded to be seen. And in an era obsessed with image, with surface and spectacle, the pineapple became the ideal accessory. You sit for a moment on a bench beneath one such portrait. A family scene, mother and child, and a pineapple resting on the table between them like a third, slightly spiky sibling. And it strikes you that perhaps what made the pineapple so powerful wasn't just its rarity or cost, but its timing. It arrived during a moment in history when everything, fashion, food, furniture, was about statement. When visibility mattered more than reality. When being seen with something was more valuable than owning it, or even understanding it. In that sense, it was the perfect symbol. It let people dream of other lands, other climates, other selves. It told them they were part of something bigger, connected to trade winds and far-off colonies, to secret hothouses and scientific discovery. It let them hold a piece of the world, even if only for a dinner party or a brush stroke. And somehow, all these years later, it still tells a story of ambition wrapped in leaves, a story of excess that still managed to taste good, a story that's just absurd enough to make you smile as the light finally shifts from gray to gold. You step out into the morning. The streets are brighter now, bustling slowly back to life. A boy with a basket of rolls pedals past. A woman balances a tray of teacups and yawns theatrically. Someone down the lane is shouting about oysters. And somewhere, in a bakery window or on a chipped tile above a door, you spot one last pineapple, etched faintly into the glass like an echo. It greets you now not as a symbol of wealth or power or even fruit, but simply as an old friend. And now, as morning quietly unfolds outside your window and the soft hum of the world begins again, let your thoughts drift back through the warm glow of waxed portraits and pineapple puddings, candlelit banquets and spiky greenhouse dreams. You've wandered Georgian gardens by moonlight, peeked behind kitchen doors, and stood beneath stone fruit perched proudly on rooftops. You've heard the gentle gossip of dinner guests and the steamy sigh of hothouse vents. You've seen the pineapple in every possible disguise. Hero, villain, muse, dessert. It was never just a fruit. It was hope in a hat box, theater in your salad, a tropical joke whispered through marble halls. And somehow, it still is. So as your breath slows and your limbs soften, picture it one last time. The pineapple, golden and ridiculous, glowing softly in the candlelight of a room long vanished. It sits in silence, just waiting. Sweet and spiny, a little smug, and wonderfully unnecessary. Let that image carry you gently toward sleep. Because history, after all, is just a collection of people doing their best to be remembered. Sometimes with battles and treaties, and sometimes with something juicy perched on a silver plate. Tonight it was pineapples. Tomorrow, who knows? But for now, let the past hold you softly. And rest. Good night.